Hello everyone and welcome. This week we take you on a tour to discover the tech ecosystem in South Korea with a brilliant guest, Bernard Mooon. You may not know South Korea counts over 18,000 startups and 18 unicorns, placing it in the top 10 on a worldwide scale. To decipher this flourishing ecosystem, I'm delighted to welcome Bernard, who is the co-founder and partner at SparkLabs, the country's most important accelerator and the third largest globally. Let's welcome Bernard. Hello Bernard, welcome to the Kitchen Talk. How are you and where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Seoul, South Korea.
In 2021 alone, 8 new unicorns, bringing the country's score, I think, to 18 unicorns. And that's like a 6 times more than what happened in 2017. I think there were only 3 unicorns back then. How do you explain the success right now in South Korea?
Minor correction. I think like a couple of years ago, there was like 10 or 11, a few in public about a year ago, like Coupang went IPO on NASDAQ. I think it was like a $60 billion IPO. There's also Hyperconnect. It's a company that was bought for $1.8 million by Match.com, right? So that, lost its unicorn status once it was acquired. So it's just a long process in the making. I mean, there's been tech unicorns in South Korea since the 90s, and it's just continued. I mean, it's like even in the early 2000s, there was Gmarket that got bought by eBay for I think it was like 1.3 billion. I mean, there's all these unicorns churning out of the South Korean market, but I think it's just expedited recently just because of the new wave of entrepreneurs. The issue with I would say South Korean markets, even South Korean entrepreneurs, even when we launched SparkLabs in end of 2012, early 2013, was one was language, and two, a lot of them got very comfortable with the domestic market since even though it's a small market, South Korea has been able to produce these billion-dollar companies just focus on its domestic market alone. And now you have these next wave of entrepreneurs that are more bilingual and also looking outside of South Korea. So I think that's why you see this sort of exponential growth finally, since South Korea has been a leader in a lot of tech sectors, but it's only been able to focus on its domestic market. And then countries and companies from countries like China and elsewhere, they sort of just either copy or make similar products. And those entrepreneurs in South Korea aren't able to capture those other markets, but now I think they are.
So in which sectors do you see the highest growth?
I don't think there's any like one sector that dominates in South Korea. I think it's a sign of the maturity. It's been consumer to enterprise. It's been across like e-commerce to AI to enterprise software. So, and biotech is always strong. So I think that's the strength of the South Korean market is that compared to other markets in Asia, there's a level of maturity where you see startups and innovation across all sectors, and that one really dominates.
Did the pandemic actually have like a positive impact on startups and the tech ecosystem as a whole?
I don't think there's that much of a change. I mean, I think the benefit is just maybe in terms of PR for South Korea, right? Because it was one of probably the top 3 or 4 countries globally that dealt with COVID and the pandemic well. I think the government and private companies that actually stepped up, especially on the COVID testing side, it just really showed a strength in like the partnership and innovation of the country. But otherwise, it was COVID didn't, I would say, speed up anything in terms of what was already existing. So.
And what about blockchain? It seems to be quite big actually in South Korea. How can you explain that?
Yeah, so we've been early investors in blockchain and not really crypto on the currency side. But we've invested in the space since 2014. So we we were early investors in FX and FX cryptocurrency exchange out of Sweden. That was a few years too early, and they got acquired by Sayfellow, which is an exchange out of Sweden. We also backed Genies in 2014. They're one of the leaders in the NFT space right now. They do an exclusive for digital avatar and celebrity NFTs for Warner Music, Universal Music, and others, such as Dapper. They have a partnership with Dapper Labs. So the second marketplace that Dapper has launched is with Genies. The first one was with the NBA, NBA Top Shots. And also, then we were the first Czech in 2015 with Blocko, which is a leading enterprise blockchain company in South Korea, and also Centby, which is a leading Bitcoin remittance. So we've been active, for a while, but it's not our core. It's probably less than 10% of our portfolio. So what is interesting in South Korea is that it's not only the currency. Like if you look at the U.S. for a while, all the innovation and investors were focused on actually the currency side. I would say Korea, it was not completely split, but there was a lot of focus also on the infrastructure and actual blockchain technology. So as I mentioned, Blocko, we saw, the way we saw Blocko was, it's an alternative database for enterprises that want to use blockchain technology. We don't see blockchain as like a end all be all or cure all for everything, but we just think it's an alternative technology for companies and other providers to use. So I think that's the way that the South Korean market has matured, in a sense that it's been one of the most active, right? For a while, it was like the leading trading volume of Ethereum, and I think like three or four other top currencies globally for several years. So it's very active on the actual cryptocurrency side, but it's also been one of the most active on the actual development of blockchain technology and integration into sort of real world applications. So there's been this craze throughout, and I think you could really actually trace it from even uh, 20 years ago, because Korea was one of the first one. Actually, it was probably the first ones to implement these virtual currencies. I think the first one was Hancoin in '99. So, and it grew within a few years, where 50% of the market, or 50% of actual people in South Korea, were buying Hancoin, these virtual coins in games, in online gaming. So the idea of virtual currency has been in South Korea for over 20 years. So I think it was just an easy step forward to accept cryptocurrencies.
So, Bernard, Korea is a country with a population of actually 56 million people, and which is relatively small for an Asian nation compared to other countries such as Indonesia, Japan, Philippines, and China. So, which would you say is the primary market for Korean tech startups?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the first market is South Korea, right? Because it is still one of the most, you know, highest consumer spending countries in Asia. If you look at it, I mean, I think it's more embarrassing, but it's like the fourth largest luxury goods market in the world by like pure revenue for a lot of companies, like I think Ferragamo and Vendi and various other luxury brands. It's the sixth largest e-commerce market in the world globally. That's why Coupang, right, had the $60 billion IPO just based on the South Korean market alone. So it is just this high consumer spending market that's able, since the late '90s, to create multi-billion-dollar unicorns. If you take that in comparison, not just with Indonesia, but we obviously have friends also in the VC market in India. They don't look at it as a population of 1 billion. They actually look at it as a population of 50 million of people with high disposable income. And so if you look at that, that's also South Korea is probably quite similar in that sense. So yeah, so I think it's just sort of unique for such a small country that it has such a high sort of consumer spend, and it's one of the top 10 in various markets globally.
And how is the country integrating in the region's tech ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think it's very much integrated, not just with the big companies like Samsung and LG. They previously did have partnerships and manufacturing centers in China. I think recently, and accelerated due to COVID, they shifted to Vietnam. They have research centers throughout, and entrepreneurs, sort of touching actually upon your prior question, the entrepreneurs in South Korea, they do, after the domestic market in South Korea, they do look at probably next either US and Japan. And then I would say third is China. So these are all sort of target markets for the companies. Example is also Crossfire and Nexon, these online gaming companies. Probably 3 or 4 of the top 10 online games in South Korea are made by in China are made by South Korean gaming companies. And more recently, the past few years, a lot of South Korean companies have startups have looked towards Southeast Asia for the next sort of markets to capture. It's been some of our own companies, but even if you look at the recent acquisition I mentioned, HyperConnect, that got bought by Match for 1.8 billion, their initial market was Southeast Asia. So.
And the government seems to have played an important role in this success. So can you tell us in which ways actually the government laid the foundation for this exponential success?
Yeah, I think they sort of followed the model in Japan. And in the 90s, they really invested in the infrastructure of the country. So that's why, you've seen all these studies, if you read about them, since the late 90s, South Korea has always had the highest and fastest broadband penetration rates. It's broadband and then wireless. I mean, it was amazing. Even like when we launched SparkLabs, I remember like 6-7 years ago, the wireless actually first the home connections. This is a while, like 6-7 years ago. They had a choice of 50 megabps or 100 megabps, right? And this is like 6-7 years ago. And then even wireless recently, you look at it, you could go anywhere. You could go 8 stories down or 60 stories up in a building. You could probably get anywhere from 50 to 75 megabps, right? So the connectivity throughout the country, I think one is the fact that half the population does live in Seoul, a city of 25 million metro, and everything is densely populated. And so it's easy to sort of focus and build out the infrastructure within the city of Seoul. But even throughout the country, the government really invested. This is one of the few cases where I think if you build it, they will come, actually worked out, where they actually built out the infrastructure, and it really did speed up investment and innovation from other sources that allowed Korea to be a leader in sort of a tech playground, right? One VC I remember meeting in the early 2000s when I was doing my second startup, here in Seoul, Bill Gurley from Benchmark, he visited and he just said, yeah, I come to Korea to see what is going to happen through the rest of the world 5 years later, because it was such a almost sort of like a petri dish of tech innovation, because it was this sort of densely populated country where they laid out all the tech infrastructure, and you could sort of see people already also with a herd mentality testing out new technologies readily. So.
Well, thank you, Bernard, for shedding some light on the South Korean tech ecosystem. And don't leave yet, as Bernard is coming back in the Speakeasy. We have asked him a few fun questions, you will see. And of course, you can subscribe to our channel. You can see the link appearing at the bottom of your screen. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below also. And I will see you next week, same time, same channel. Cheers, bye.
I recently downloaded Duolingo at the request of my kids so I could learn a new language. Remote. I've always been remote even before the pandemic. 0. I always keep a 0 policy. Night owl. I typically stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd say more equitable across the world in terms of tech access and just economics. Enjoy reading more and be more thoughtful to people around you. I'd rather drink and take a Uber. Oh, I'm a little biased. Let's say, I know you want me to say South Korea, but I'll say US.